Welcome back to On the Clock, our show about making the moments matter. I'm your host, Elisa Gums. Today, we're chatting about overcoming stress and burnout with Dr. Cori Cooper, a pharmacist, nutrition coach, and life coach. As a certified diabetes care and education specialist, she's the creator of the online program Do Diabetes Differently. And she's working with the CDC Foundation on its Live to the Beat campaign to help African Americans take small steps to improve their health. Cori, we're so excited to have you here on the Clock. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. This is so much fun. I can't wait for us to dive into our topic today.
Well, speaking of diving in, I don't even know where to start with this because whenever we are creating programming for Black women or have a gathering of Black women, there is always a request to address stress and burnout. From your
Mhm.
perspective, what is going on?
Well, there's a lot of things going on, but I think probably the reason why it's so heightened now is because we just came out of this pandemic, right? And so we were stressed before, but now the pandemic made us like have to sit it in our living room on a daily basis for almost 2 years. So when you think about what women are responsible for and what women have to do on a daily basis, so even before, so don't even count the pandemic, right? You're a busy working mom, busy schedule, and usually you're caring for whatever needs to happen in the household. So kids, spouse, sometimes parents, one out of every three caregivers is a woman. And so when you think about the scope of what women have to do on a daily basis, it doesn't just happen in what's happening in the house. But then you add in, okay, I've got the stress of parenting. I've got the stress of my busy job. Maybe I've got some relationship stress. Maybe I've got some financial stress. And so when you put all that in the midst of now I have to sit at home and teach my kids. So now I'm the teacher, right? I'm handling the curriculum for my children. I was already having some stress in parenting anyway. So now I'm handling their curriculum. And then I'm the school nurse because I got to make sure they stay healthy. And on top of that, my spouse is here with me too. So that relationship stuff that I wasn't dealing with beforehand because we all got up and went to work every day, now it's sitting in my living room and I have to deal with it and I have literally no way out, right? So all of those things were just compounded in the last 2 years. So even if you take away the pandemic, the fact of the matter is that the pandemic really heightened for people and made them more aware of exactly how stressed and burned out they were.
You know this story all too well firsthand. Like many of us, you were sacrificing your health to a demanding job. Can you share your personal story around stress and burnout and health?
Yeah, and it's funny because so I have my personal story, and I'll tell you about the time when I actually first became more aware of what stress and burnout was, how that was actually impacting my life. But this is something we continue to live on a daily basis. So I experienced it. I had this sort of major experience as a result of that. But ultimately, this is a daily thing, and we have to work at this on a daily basis. But for me, when I first started to pay attention to the fact that I wasn't living my life in alignment with with where I actually what I actually wanted from my life, was back in 2013. I technically we'll start in 2012. So I was married. It had been a year since we had been married. I was working this great job where I traveled all the time. I stayed in all these fancy hotels and I racked up all the miles that supported vacations and company car, all the things, right? And so I'm constantly working, constantly, on the go traveling, but it never really seemed to dawn on me that that was actually having an impact on my health until I got pregnant. So I got pregnant. So my husband and my first pregnancy, 2013, we were blessed with twin girls, and we were so excited because we were, now transitioning into the realm of parenthood, and we couldn't wait. And I continued to work the same schedule. I continued to travel. I continued to do all the things, not once stopping to think that maybe I needed to be nurturing the two little people in my body in a different way. So unfortunately, in May of 2013, it all kind of came to a head where I was traveling again. So I was actually in Dallas. Something didn't feel quite right. Came home that Monday, went to an appointment, and my doctor said, "You're in labor." I was 21 weeks at the time, so far too early to be in labor. And I had to, immediately go home. He's like, "Go home, don't move. We'll just try to keep those little girls in there as long as we can." But unfortunately, a week later, they were just ready to come out. I could no longer withhold the contractions. I was rushed to the emergency room, and I delivered them early. And I delivered them far too early for them to be able to sustain life on their own. So they were born alive, but that's before the time where you could have medical intervention because their little lungs just aren't strong enough yet. So yeah, I had to then bury them a week later. So for me, that was a moment of just really understanding how what I thought success was supposed to look like. The working the long hours, the traveling, the being having the company car, taking all these trips, that it's a mirage. It's not what we really truly value. And if we're actually intentional about how we want to show up in the world, then we would realize that all of those things that we focus on are simply us sacrificing our health for a paycheck and not really paying attention to how we want to show up in the world and how we want to show up in our families. And most importantly, how we even want to show up for ourselves.
Cori, I want to thank you so much for your openness in sharing that with us. And, if I may, to ask you about the changes that you've made, internally and in your life since then, since realizing that, all you really were sacrificing for work. And how has that changed for you?
Well, in one way, it definitely has changed how I even work with other women. So when I started my career, in a diabetes clinic where we focus on medications and we focus on eating the right foods, completely ignoring all the other things that might be going on in our lives. It's strictly eat this, not that, walk 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and all will be better. Take your medicine, all is better. And so it takes people away from actually focusing on the other things in their life that are actually contributing to why we're even talking about diabetes in the first place, why we're talking about heart disease in the first place, why we're talking about infertility, why we're talking about miscarriage. All of these things are directly tied to what is actually happening around us and not just about the food that we're putting in our mouth. And so that turning point for me really became a realization of I was sitting in a place with, I'm not the only one. So there's tons of women around me who are experiencing the exact same thing of this overwhelm, this burnout, this stress, and they're going to traditional. They're going to their physician. They're doing what they think they're supposed to do. They're eating the right foods, and yet they're still struggling in some way. And my personal experience just really made me transition to that's where the Do Diabetes Differently came from, is that we have to start talking about the impact of our life on what's going on inside our bodies. So we get so caught up in the exterior, right? What do we look a certain way? We need to show up a certain way for this meeting. We have to do this later. We need to be there for the kids. My husband has this event. We always are focused on everyone else and how we show up for everyone else. But we need to be more concerned about what's going on the inside and the long-term complications that may result from that. And so for me, that experience just really shifted into I had different conversations with people. I stopped talking about just, here, you need to eat this and you shouldn't eat that. It was really more a transition into, I need to know what's going on in your life that's contributing to your thoughts around how you're going to approach your health, your thoughts, how you're going to approach that disagreement you had with your husband, your thoughts around how you're going to talk to your kids following whatever happened at school. So for me, it completely changed not only what I wanted for myself and what I thought and what I recognized was important for me, but what I also saw in other women, and those conversations with them completely shifted.
You started out talking about the pandemic, and I want to bring us back to that because you just said,
Mm-hmm.
you've transitioned to talking to people about what's going on in their lives. And I think a lot of us don't know what's going on in our lives. As you said, during the pandemic, we were stressed before, but we realized for the first time that we were stressed or
Mm-hmm.
that we were burnt out because, as you put it, it sat in our living room all day. And as I like to think of it, the pandemic was really the first time a lot of us had to sit with our feelings and sit with our life choices. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
how did I get to this particular point right here where this is my
Yes.
life? And do I like it? Am I happy with it? Is this
Right.
the home I want, the relationship I want, the job I want, all of those things. So, for those of us who've been going through that realization for the last couple of years, what's your advice about how to become more aware of what's going on in your life and how those choices might be affecting your health?
Yeah. So it's funny when, and I'm sure there are many women who are leaning into the screen right now or raising their hand when you were like, "Ooh, my life choices." Yes. Because it was a revelation during the past 2 years of all the things that we don't seem to have time to pay attention to, that all of a sudden you're like, how in the world did I get to this place? And be okay with it. So, and I think that was the thing that I think a lot of people struggled with, was you didn't even realize you were getting there, and then yet you were okay with it, understanding that you weren't totally happy, but you knew you were stressed, you knew you were anxious, but somehow you didn't even, there wasn't even an approach of how to deal with it. And so I think the daily routine is became a heightened factor for a lot of people during this period because you had to deal with it. There was no place for you to go, and you had to come up with a routine for yourself, for your family, so that y'all could, one, have separate time, have together time, and then still be able to function in you, mom and dad and career and kids in school. And so the first thing I like to tell people is, let's not create routines that are not unique to what's going on in our homes. So a lot of times what happens is we watch on YouTube, we look on the internet, and everybody's got these beautiful morning and evening routines, and you try to fit this into your lifestyle, and you realize that, and you can't stick with it. You can't do it. And the problem is that it's not a one size fits all. So you have to take a look at your life and decide, maybe, journaling is not important to you. Maybe that's just not something that you can reach for right now. Because a lot of times that's what happens, is we pick these things that we tell people: journal, meditate, exercise. We give people these different ideas of how to relieve stress without thinking about what's going on in my everyday that supports whether or not that's going to work for me. So this is where you have to really start being intentional about the things that you like to do. And the only way that you recognize the things that you like to do is if you take some time to actually step away and spend some time with you. So usually that's the first thing I like for people to do, is to actually maybe find a room. I like to go in our guest room at home because it's very hotel-esque, because it's a guest room. There's no clutter, there's no toys. And so I can go sit in there and I can be free from the distractions that normally happen in my life and actually think through what I need in that moment. And so maybe in that moment, that could look like meditation. Maybe in that moment, that could look like taking a nap. Maybe in that moment, it could look like journaling, or even just getting thoughts out of your head in a brain dump. I love brain dumps because I like messy paper. I don't like messy thoughts in my head. So I love that I can draw and get things out on paper. But you won't know that if you don't actually remove yourself from the environment that's creating the clutter and the stress and the anxiety that you experience from stress and burnout. So finding some time, alone time with yourself is the first step in trying to figure out what you need to nurture whatever you're feeling at that moment. A lot of us were reaching for, because we were avoiding, right? Because we, didn't even realize we were stressed out about stuff. We may have reached for a glass of wine instead of reaching for that quiet time. We may have reached for, whatever was in the pantry. Your kid didn't finish their lunch, so you're standing there just eating the leftovers because it's just on the counter, and you might as well because you haven't eaten lunch yet today anyway. And so if you're paying attention, you start to notice those habits. So if you can pause and pay attention, you notice when you're buffering with food, when you're buffering with playing on social media, when you're buffering with wine. And so once you notice that, then you can start to pull away at it. You can say, oh, this triggered me to go get the glass of wine. So now that I know the trigger, I can create some new habit that I can do instead. So it first starts with just really paying attention and understanding how you need nourishment, because what works, and the other point I'll make too, is it's also what worked for you before may not work for you now. I have a lot of conversations with women where they say, if I could just get back to before I had kids, I know I can figure it out. And let me tell you, the person that is back there is not going to serve you right now, because that is not your reality right now. That was great back there, but your answer is not back there. I need you to come forward with me, look at where we are today, and figure out how we're going to make this work in the current environment that we live in today. Stop reaching back to solve problems for today.
Woo, that was a whole word. You said, stop reaching back to solve problems for today. Your answer is not back there.
No.
Wow. You did say one thing that I found so interesting about becoming aware of the things that trigger us to be able to change the behavior. And I think I've found in my own personal life that that's like step one. But then when you realize what the trigger is, like you're a little bit afraid to kind of confront it. And, this is open real talk. So I know other people out there can relate. But when you realize that, the job that pays the bills, that gives you the title that you wanted, or the prestige that you wanted, or you thought was the dream job, or that the relationship that you're committed to, or whatever it is what's triggering you, how do you then approach the trigger?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so one, as you said, the trigger could be the job, and the job still offers the paycheck that pays for all the things that you need to do at your house. So you need the job. So that means that trigger is not going away. The trigger could be a person that is also maybe not going away, right? And so what you have to do is figure out a way that you can find what you need in that moment, even in the midst of what's going on around you. So one of the things I like to do from in a work setting, so when you have all these tasks and all these requests and all these meetings in this demanding job that is often pressing, you have to, what I like to do is just how you have all the tabs open on your computer because you're working on all these different things, shut them all. I don't want any tabs open. You pick the one thing you want to work on right now, and that's the only tab you open. So the other day I was working on I needed to write something. So I only opened up Google Docs, and that's all I worked in at the moment was that Google document where I needed to type up what I needed to submit. And I closed everything else. And what we have to get out of is this place of multitasking. So multitasking is we throw it around like it's a badge of honor, Like I'm a mom. I multitask. I'm a working mom. I really multitask. I mean, so we throw that around, and unfortunately, multitasking is kind of like it weakens the muscle. So when you think about your ability to concentrate, think about it from the standpoint like it's a muscle. And so if you every time you multitask, you are weakening that muscle's ability to focus. You are weakening that muscle's ability to concentrate. And so you actually aren't doing yourself any favors when you multitask. So we really have to get to this place of saying, okay, look, I've got all these things I need to do for this job, but what's the one thing I'm going to work on right now? And we have to get to a place of blocking off time in our calendars to do that. So I routinely block off a section in my calendar, and it's just blocked. I don't tell anybody what I'm doing, but I can't block time for myself, then I can't get any of the work done that helps me to drive the business. Similarly, just like how you have to block off time for your work, and to get that done, you need to block off time to deal with the person that may be triggering for you. So you need to block off time for that relationship. One of the things that I think is really important when we think about our relationships with people is very often we're caught up in what the other person is doing and how the other person is triggering you, but we're not thinking about what we brought to the conversation, what we brought to that environment. So if you already came in annoyed because of what happened yesterday, then you can't even receive if there's something that you can't even receive anything good in that moment because you're still holding on to what happened yesterday. So part of removing the trigger is checking ourselves on how we come to the conversation, how we show up to the meeting, how we come to, what to come home to cook dinner. All of these things are really dependent upon. We like to think about this as, um, I'm doing everything. They're doing nothing. So you're at work. I do everything. No one helps me. Same thing happens at home. We have to get out of this victim mindset and recognize that, hey, I've got control over this. Let me deal with what I have control over. Because the more you assert your control, the more likely you are to be able to remove those triggers. You can't remove a trigger if you're not willing to assert the control that you have over the situation. No one can make you feel any type of way. You're responsible for that. And so you have to get to a place of thinking about, how do I preserve my peace? So even you can even think of it from a selfish term in that way. How am I preserving my peace? And if preserving my peace means I hit decline for that meeting request today, well, then that's just what I have to do. Because the bottom line is that no one is the work will continue to happen whether you show up for the meeting or not. I know we think we're wonderful, and we all are. But there are other people who can make sure that that task gets done in your absence.
I know that's a hard one for us to learn. It
Yes.
certainly is. But whether you think of it from a place of preserving your peace or you think of it from a place of maximizing your performance, you cannot
Mm-hmm.
show up as your best self if you're exhausted, if you're sleep deprived, if you haven't given yourself any fuel because all you ate was your kids' leftover lunch,
Mm-hmm.
and so some things have to change. In the vein of change, we
Mm.
have now moved into this new phase of the pandemic, which, quite honestly, I find to be also stressful, whether we're trying to figure out hybrid work or going back to the office. And we're doing it in the face of breakthrough infections, repeat infections, new variants. Every week it's something different.
Yeah.
How do we navigate this rush to return to normal while still taking good care of ourselves?
Yeah. And it's going to, it's unfortunate because, you get into the mindset of, oh, we're out of this. And then technically it just looks different now. And so it becomes almost even more overwhelming because you thought you were free.
Right.
And then you realize, no, actually, we still have to deal with this. And I think the first thing is just recognizing that there are things that you are able to control and there are things that you're not. And so this really goes back to this place of whatever you can control, is also dictated about how you want that that thing to move. So how slow you want things to move for you, or if you're ready to speed things up. So just because everyone else around you is speeding things up, if you're not there yet, then you again you have the control to pull back on the reins and say, "Hey, I'm not there with you." And this really all goes back to that beginning conversation where we were talking about just becoming more aware and being more intentional about what is triggering you, and then how do you deal with it. So the fact that what's happening in the world today is not only impacting us individually, but I think part of it is because it affects children. And I hear a lot of moms just really struggle with this. It would be fine if I was only worried about me. But because I have to worry about, my child too, it in that way it becomes overwhelming. In that way it starts to feel like it's not in your control. And again, I always have people come back to what are the things that you can put in place? So that's where this routine comes in. So this is you picking things out that that you can do in your home, that you can do with your children, that you can do with your spouse or your significant other to help level set. This is how we are approaching what's happening in the world today. I'm not going to let it be dictated by what's going on in the news. I'm not going to let it be dictated by what our neighbor's family is doing. I'm not going to be let it dictated by my job. We as a family unit are going to make a conscious decision as to how we are going to approach what is happening in the world around us today. And as long as you stay true to the decisions that you make, then the rest of the whatever is going on around you doesn't mean that, it may not does it mean that sometimes it may not work out? Does it mean that sometimes, you thought you were protecting your child and then your child unfortunately, gets sick? All of that stuff is possible. All of that stuff can happen. But when you make the conscious decision of how you choose to deal with it, you still remain in control. And that just it gives you it allows you to act from a place of empowerment, even if stuff doesn't go your way. It doesn't feel as overwhelming because you acted from a place of empowerment. So it's really this idea of making decisions without outside influence.
Mm.
Same thing of what we do as a lot of times for us as women when we're dealing with a lot of the stress from work, it's because we're allowing these outside influences to dictate how we act. So it really doesn't change when it comes to how you re-enter the world for following the pandemic for the past 2 years. You have to get back to this place of I'm in control. I'm making a decision that works for me and my family, and this is how we're going to approach it. Let the chips fall where they may, because you're still going to be okay. We have to really rely on our resilience and just trust ourselves a lot more than we have been in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one for people,
Mm-hmm.
first to hear their own voice and then to trust their own voice, both of which have to happen if we're going to, make decisions from a place without outside influence. Do you have like a quick tip while we're there? Because I think that information is probably hitting people right now as
Mm-hmm.
they're listening, and some people for the first time. But do you have a tip for how you can, either strengthen your own inner voice or get some clarity around what it is that you want without taking the outside world into account?
Yeah, I mean, my quick tip is to find that place for you that allows you to separate yourself from the outside world, because then you are not distracted by the things that you see. Because a lot of times we'll sit down at our desk and say, okay, someone said I should journal, so I'm going to sit down at my desk and journal. So you sit in the midst of where the drama is and try to do something restorative for you. And it's usually not going to work because out the corner of your eye, you see the email pop up, or you notice that, oh, I forgot to mail that bill. You see things around you that distract you. And so you really have to put your place. I love going outside for this. So if you don't have a place in your home, I love the idea of walking outside and taking your headphones, but not listening to anything, Because a lot
I
of
feel so
times,
seen right now. I do that all the time.
yes, because then it's going to drown out the things that you don't need to hear, and then it helps you to focus on what you do need to hear. And not only that, that being outside will just helps to raise your vibration anyway, so that you can be a lot more in tune to listening to yourself. But yes, I love going outside. Put the headphones in. Don't listen to anything, and walk. Take a notebook with you. Maybe just go sit. If you have a lovely place that you can go sit and just think for a while, just do that. But you have to remove yourself from the everyday environment, the everyday frustrations and a lot of people think, well, I don't, someone told me the other day, it's like, well, I don't have time to go on vacation. I was like, vacation? That's so far from my mind. I don't have time to go on a vacation either. But I do have time to walk outside and walk a few steps from my house with my headphones in. And so no one's paying attention to me and I'm not paying attention to them. So yeah, so that's really the first thing is that you can't hear yourself and you, because the voice that speaks to you is so soft sometimes and you really have to be paying attention. And sometimes it's felt and not even heard.
Mm.
And you can't do either of those things. You can't hear it, nor can you feel it if you are in the middle of the things that are overwhelming you, in the middle of the things that are frustrating you. So yeah, step away as much as you can and find that quiet time to actually listen. And then whenever you hear, whether you like it or not, trust it.
I want to bring some of the medical knowledge into
Mm-hmm.
this. We all know that stress is bad, and we all know that we want to avoid being burned out, but there are very real ramifications for our well being that a lot of us don't know
Yeah.
about. Tell us how burnout affects our health, and especially cardiovascular disease.
Yeah. So I know we probably all heard the story of the fight or flight system. I think we all learned that back in the day. And so we think about fight or flight. So that is our body's way of letting us know when there is imminent danger and we need to respond quickly. So once upon a time ago, before we had all the conveniences that we do now, our emergencies were running from tigers and, trying to chase down food and all the things. Well, unfortunately, your body actually can't tell the difference between the tiger and the 4 hour meeting that you haven't prepared for yet. It can't tell the difference between, you having to go out and find your food and kill it and cook it, as well as the struggles you're having with your husband, the struggles you're having with your kids. It's all stress. It's the same stress. Now, it's not too often that we're running from tigers, but we very often are sitting in a meeting feeling overwhelmed from work. We very often are dealing with conversations with our spouses and our kids. And so that's chronic stress. So your body can't tell the difference between the tiger and the stuff that you're dealing with today, but the stuff you're dealing with today happens all the time. So your body stays in a state of elevated cortisol, elevated epinephrine or adrenaline. And so what that's doing is just pounding on the heart. And essentially, what happens is the heart becomes desensitized to that constant state of stress. And so that can lead to decreased cardiac output, which means long term chronic kidney disease. That could be high blood pressure. That could be heart attacks. And so, all of this stress, you can think about it complete, just constantly pounding on the heart. Is weakening the heart. It's a muscle. So because you're weakening that heart this constant pounding of cortisol and epinephrine, your heart no longer can respond the way that it needs to. And so there is a direct tie between chronic stress and burnout to what is physically happening in the body and what is physically linking to degenerative diseases like cardiovascular disease, and in particular in communities of color where those stresses happen a lot more frequently. Then you start to see, now the numbers may not look different. So when you look at the numbers for cardiovascular disease, the statistics, a lot of times they'll say, it'll be equal between the white, black, and brown communities. But when you start to factor in all of those things that we don't talk about, we can't capture as well in statistics, like the built environment. So what's in the neighborhood? What do people feel safe? Do they have access to healthy grocery stores? Do they have access to parks or green spaces? The how many jobs are they working to care for the family? Is it a single parent family? Where all of those things don't get factored into the statistics, but all of that stress. And so in our community, it's really important that we stay focused on what's happening around us, because it directly ties to the fact that there's more cardiovascular deaths than any other death in the country. The fact that, so that's 1 in every 3 deaths is related to cardiovascular disease. So those things are real results and real consequences of not dealing with the daily stressors in our life.
As I mentioned in the intro, you're working with the Centers for Disease Control Foundation on something called Live to the Beat, which is all about Blacks and heart health. Tell us about the mission of the campaign and why you became involved in it.
Yeah, so really excited about the Live to the Beat campaign from the CDC Foundation. So it is a national cardiovascular campaign that's specifically targeted towards the Black community. So it's created by members of the Black and Brown community, and it is informed by members of the Black and Brown community. So informed with our life experiences. And for me, that was extremely important because a lot of times when, as I told you when I started, I was taught that you tell people to exercise for 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and then you tell people to eat this and you tell people to eat that. And that's not what everybody's experience is going to be within our communities. It's going to be difficult to create that same exact plan across the community. So I was really excited to be a part of Live to the Beat. I had an interview with comedian Kev on Stage. And so our topic as a part of his Live to the Beat web series focused on, nobody has time for that. So I ain't got time for that. That's the first thing you hear when you talk to somebody about trying to be healthy. I ain't got time for that. So to me, that really hit home because, working mom, just like many of the people watching today. So that's the main thing we always hear. I don't have time. How can we create more time? How can we make this a daily routine, a daily habit, and to really foster a healthy lifestyle that doesn't just extend to us, but to all the people that we care about and to our friends and family. So it was really important for me to be a part of that. And I'm excited for my episode to air later this month.
This has been so informative and truly empowering. Thank you so much, Dr. Cori, for sharing the unique ways you're helping people make the most of the time we've been given. And thank you all for watching On the Clock. We'll see you next time as we continue to talk about working with purpose and living with passion.